Okay, so what is the importance why we should discuss philosophical background? Research is about acquiring knowledge, correct? And developing an understanding. It collects facts and interpret them to create a picture of the world around us and even within us. It is obvious then that we should hold a view on what a knowledge is and how we can make sense of our surrounding. How we can make sense of our. These views will be based on the philosophical stance that we take. Some researchers think that this is not important, but that's a mistake. Just take a look at this picture. On the right side, we have people who are skeptical of the use of philosophy, while on the left side, those people who held philosophy as valuable, and all these people won a Nobel Prize. On the left, we have Werner Heisenberg. He said, I think the modern physics has definitely decided in favor of Plato. In fact, the smallest units of matter are not physical objects. They are forms, ideas, which can be expressed unambiguously. Next, we have Einstein. We also have Erwin Schrödinger. He said, the plurality that we perceive is only an appearance, it is not real. And last is Niels Bohr. They consider those developments in physics during the last decades which have shown how problematic such concepts such as objective and subjective are. So why you should find it necessary to know something about philosophy as a background to your research? Why do you think so? The answer to that is because everyone is a philosopher. Everyone has a concept of the world. In fact, the opposite to having a philosophy is not having no philosophy, but having a bad philosophy. The unphilosophical person has an unconscious philosophy which they apply in their practice, whether of science or politics or in their daily lives. You need to develop a sensitivity towards philosophical issues so that you can evaluate research critically. It will help you to discern the underlying and possibly the contentious assumptions upon which research reports are based, even when those are not explicit. Having background in philosophy will enable you to judge the appropriateness of the methods that have been employed and the validity of the conclusions. Your research and how you carry it out is deeply influenced by the theory or philosophy that underpins it. I think it's important to show this table because most of our examples that we will be comparing will be coming from natural science and social science. Under natural science, there are two categories. We have physical science and life science. Physical science and life science. Example of physical science, those are physics, astronomy, chemistry. While under life science, those are biology, ecology, etc. These sciences, the natural and social science, have underlying philosophical assumptions which are very, very opposing. And we can see that in a while. So there are many ways to go about seeking for answers to your research. It depends on your assumptions about what actually exists in reality, what we can know, and how we can acquire. So let's start with metaphysics. What is a metaphysics? Metaphysics is a branch of philosophy that examines the fundamental nature of reality, including the relationship between the mind and the matter, between substance and attribute, and between potentiality and actuality. This is the broad scope of metaphysics. Metaphysics is concerned with questions such as, what is it to be? Who are we? What is knowledge? What are things? What is time and space? It is concerned about the essence of why and what things are. There are many branches of metaphysics. At one extreme, we have materialism. Materialism holds that matter is the fundamental substance in nature, and that all things, including your mind, the state of your mind, mental state, and the consciousness, are the results of material interactions. According to philosophical materialism, mind and consciousness are byproducts of material processes such as biochemistry of the human brain and nervous system, without which they cannot exist. For example, music. Music is sound, but the essence is, it is because of the vibrations of the material. On the other side of the extremity, we have idealism. According to idealism, reality is all in the mind. Everything that exists is in some way dependent on the activity of the mind. So, some of that everything is dependent on the activity of the mind. It holds that consciousness or mind to be the origin of the material world. Example, music. Music is not just sound, it is an emotional experience. So you see, these two are very extreme. For the materialism, matters are the fundamentals. For the idealism, the mind and consciousness are the fundamentals. So as you can imagine, these are the opposite ends of the spectrum, with many intermediate positions in between that hold the balance of the importance of both the mind and the material things in various different degrees. Examples are physicalism, reductionism, panpsychism, dualism, pluralism, determinism, vitalism, spiritualism, objectivism, and subjectivism. So just remember that these beliefs have varying assumptions and which can be traced back to both idealism and materialism. Epistemology. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy that is concerned with the theory of knowledge. It is the philosophical study of the nature, the origin, and the limit of the human knowledge. It includes the justification of knowledge and the rationality of belief. It deals with how we know things and what we can regard as acceptable knowledge in a discipline. Epistemology addresses the question such as, what does it mean to say that we know something? How do we know what we know? And what makes justified beliefs justified? It is concerned with the reliability of our senses and the power of the mind. So, epistemology is all about knowing how to know something and knowing that we know something. There are approaches to acquiring knowledge. On one extreme, we have empiricism. Empiricism, as a systematic and well-developed philosophy, can be traced back to John Locke and David Hume. These philosophers argued that virtually all knowledge is based on experience. All knowledge is based on experience. The origin of all knowledge is from our senses, such as sight, hearing, touch, smell, taste, etc. Our senses imprint ideas in our brains, and then they are further worked upon through cognitive processes. Although the empirical approach is very appealing and has much to recommend, several dangers exist if it is used alone. Our perceptions, for instance, are affected by a number of variables. Research has shown that such variables as past experiences and our motivations at the time of perceiving can drastically alter what we see. Research has also revealed that our memory for events does not remain constant. Not only do we tend to forget things, but at times an actual distortion of memory might take place. Also, our sensory capabilities are limited. We can only see visible light, which range only from 380 to 740 nanometer. Beyond this range, we cannot see. For instance, X-rays, radio waves, microwaves. We cannot see those non-visible light. Our hearing is also restricted. The human auditory ranges only from 20 to 20,000 hertz. We never heard the voices and music of bats, which operates at around 100,000 hertz. Their worlds are very different from us. We haven't experienced it because human experience is very limited. So empiricism is probably the most obvious approach that is used in science because science is based on observation, and empiricism refers to the observation of a given phenomenon. It is very useful, but can't give you everything. Empiricist way of approaching knowledge is through inductive reasoning. It starts from specific observations or sensory experiences, and then it develops into a general conclusion from them. So inductive reasoning starts from something specific observation to something generalization. For example, all giraffes that I have seen have very long necks. Therefore, I conclude that all giraffes have long necks after repeated observations. However, there are problems with inductive reasoning. First, how many observations must be made before we can reasonably draw a conclusion that is reliable enough to generalize? Second, in how many situations and under which conditions should observations be made so that true conclusions can be reached? So these are the weaknesses of inductive reasoning. But this doesn't stop us from using inductive reasoning because they are still very useful. But we should be aware that what might at first seem obvious may not be so. On the other extreme, we have rationalism. This approach uses reasoning rather than experience to arrive at knowledge and assumes that valid knowledge is acquired, if the correct reasoning process is used. It was believed then that knowledge derived from reason was just as valid as and often superior to knowledge gained from observation. But there's also danger in using rationalism alone, because it is not unusual for two honest and rational individuals to reach different conclusions. But this does not mean that science does not use reasoning or rationalism. In fact, reasoning is a vital element in the scientific process. We all use reasoning. The rationalist approach to knowledge is deductive reasoning. It begins with a general statement and through logical argument comes to a specific conclusion. For example, all living things will eventually die. All living things will eventually die. That is the general statement. The premise, this is the premise. This animal is a living thing. This animal is a living thing. Therefore, this animal will eventually die. This is the simplest form of deductive argument, and this is called syllogism. As you can see, it consists of a general statement. This is the general statement. This is called the premise. And then a conclusion which follows on logically from the two statements. This one is also the premise, which is specific. This one is general, this is specific, and this is the conclusion. One problem with deductive reasoning is that the truth of the conclusions depends very much on the truth of the premise in which they are based. For example, in the past, many conclusions about the movement of the planets were incorrect due to the premise that the Earth was the center of the universe. So there are many intermediate positions that occur between these two extremes. One is intuition and the other is authority. Intuition is defined as the act or process of coming to direct knowledge or certainty without reasoning or inferring. Intuition relies on justification such as, it feels true to me, or I believe this point, although I can't really tell you why. The problem with the intuitive approach is that it does not provide a mechanism for separating accurate from inaccurate knowledge, or accurate from inaccurate experience. Although most scientific hypotheses are derived from prior research, some hypotheses arise from hunches and new ways of looking at the literature. Example is Niels Bohr's amazing intuition that electrons' energy level is quantized. Authority. Authority, as an approach to acquiring knowledge, represents an acceptance of information or facts stated by another because that person is a highly respected source. The problem with the authority approach is that the information or facts stated by the authority might be inaccurate. If the authority approach dictates that we accept whatever is decreed, how can this approach be used in science? Aside from authority and intuition, we have the best approach so far that uses both empiricism and rationalism. It is called hypothetical deductive reasoning, or commonly known as the scientific method. There are certain assumptions that underlie the scientific method, which relate to materialistic point of view from metaphysics and a positivistic view of epistemology. We'll see positivism in a bit. So what are the assumptions of scientific method? One, we have order. It is believed that the universe is an ordered system that can be investigated and the underlying rules can be exposed. Another one, we have external reality. We all share the same reality that does not depend on our existence. We can therefore all equally contribute to and share knowledge that reflects this reality. We also have reliability. We can rely on our senses and reasoning to produce facts that reliably interpret reality. Parsimony. The simpler, the better. Theories should be refined to the most compact formulation. And last, we have the generality. The rules of reality discovered through research can be applied in all relevant situations, regardless of time and place. That is, it must be general across different time periods and across different locations. And last, we have generality. The rules of reality through research can be applied in all relevant situations, regardless of time and place. Meaning to say, it must not change across different times and across different places. However, these assumptions are not accepted by the opposite camp in metaphysics and epistemology. Those with an idealist and relativist point of view insist on the importance of human subjectivity and the social dimension to facts and their meanings. This clash of viewpoints is unlikely ever to be resolved. So instead of using the term metaphysics, ontological is the choice of word of the social researchers and scientists. Although traditionally, ontology is listed as part of the major branch of philosophy, which is known as metaphysics. But it got separated and started its own band. Ontology, like methodology, has a broader meaning. It is the philosophical study of being. Ontology is the philosophical study of being. It studies concepts that directly relate to being. In particular, studies becoming, the existence, and last is the reality. So this is ontology as defined in philosophy. But as you see in this meaning from Richards in social science, ontology is the nature of our beliefs about reality. Here, ontology refers only to reality and not to these two. Just like researchers, we all have assumptions about reality, how it exists, and what can be known about it. It is the ontological question that leads a researcher to inquire what kind of reality exists. Is it a singular, verifiable reality, or is multiple socially constructed realities? So ontology is all about your assumptions of reality. What types of reality exist, or what stuff exists out there. While epistemology is concerned about how to go knowing about this stuff. Well, we already knew what epistemology is from the point of view of philosophy. What you see in here are social scientific descriptions of the same word, which includes how it can be acquired and validated. Epistemology is the nature of knowledge and the process by which knowledge is acquired and validated. It is concerned with the nature and forms of knowledge and how it can be communicated to other human beings. It is the epistemological question that leads a researcher to debate the possibility and desirability of objectivity, subjectivity, causality, validity, and generalizability. Adhering to an ontological belief system explicitly or implicitly guides one to certain epistemological assumptions. In other words, your ontological assumption of reality will surely affect your epistemological assumptions. For example, if you choose that there is a singular, verifiable reality, that is your ontological position, then your posture must be one of objective detachment or value freedom in order to be able to discover how things really are and how things really work. So your epistemological is something that is akin to objectivism. Objective. Conversely, belief in socially constructed multiple realities. So if your ontological belief is socially constructed multiple realities, then your epistemological position should reject the notion that people should be studied like objects of natural sciences. Meaning, you should get involved with the subjects and try to understand phenomena in their context. You have to be subjective. It's important to note here that it depends on what type of reality you're talking about, because there are many layers of reality. There are objective layers of reality as well as there are subjective layers of reality. And there are versions of objective realities as well as subjective realities. And even if we assume that there's only one objective reality, and that is the natural objective world, this reality is still subject to multiple interpretations by person to person. I'd like to elaborate this matter because this is where the natural scientists and social scientists have a long-standing disagreement. So for the sake of this argument, let's define what reality is. Reality is an observable system of related concepts that function together to form a theory that is capable of describing and explaining various observable phenomena. So that is one definition of reality. It is an observable system of related concepts that function together to form a theory that is capable of describing various observable phenomena. Another possible definition of reality is it is a view or a plane of perspective where all things or concepts which are interacting can be found and observed. So this is like a theory where this is like a frame of reference or a framework. For example, there are many ways to comprehend the systems of society. The different social systems. We have a hierarchical system, which is the most dominant social system. It can be found in all social groups, like in family, in work, and in circle of friends. In government, there's also hierarchy. And then we also have matriarchal or patriarchal view of looking at this dominance. Then we also have a social complexity. It is the extent to which a society is governed by something else than a kin-based relations. Let's have a look at the forms of government. There are at least 20 common forms of government. Some examples are anarchy. We also have aristocracy, capitalism, socialism, feudalism, oligarchy, and so on. Not only these forms of government developed in different time periods, not only these forms of government can be considered as quote-unquote realities by our chosen definition, but they do exist not just as socially constructed multiple realities, but as different versions of that singular, verifiable, objective reality. Again, I'd like to repeat this. Not only these forms of government develop in different time periods, not only these forms of government can be considered as quote-unquote realities by our chosen definition, but they do exist not just as socially constructed multiple realities, but as different versions of that singular, verifiable, objective truth. Maybe the point here is subjective views across different time periods and cultures are just as real as objective realities, only with many versions. There seems to be no difference if you look at this way. Both the natural scientists and social scientists are correct from ontological point of view, which is the root cause of all disagreements. They just can't find this reconciliation because both sides think that there's only one way of looking at it. It is all subjective, it is all objective. But they are both correct. It is both objective and subjective. So in a nutshell, ontological position tells about your assumptions about what types of realities exist, both in the natural and in the social world, while epistemological position tells about what things are there to know and how to know these things both in the natural and the social world. After learning this stuff, I realized that most of the reasons for the differences in beliefs, in multiple point of views, in methodologies, and understanding always points back to ontological and epistemological assumptions. Your views, your knowledge of how, what, and why the world is heavily influenced by your ontological and epistemological adherence.